Hey, welcome and good afternoon, everyone. This is the second session of our fourth annual Sustainable and Resilient Communities workshop. In this session, we're going to explore using nature-based solutions for resilience. We'll do this with a panel discussion on common challenges and strategies for success. So you'll get to hear from practitioners who have encountered these challenges and found success with nature-based solutions in the Long Island Sound region. This will be an interactive discussion, and we'll explore, when it's most appropriate to use these solutions in your resilience planning and projects, and discuss implementation details as well. Keep in mind to please keep your microphones muted and your cameras off too, unless you're speaking, to preserve the bandwidth. The workshop will be recorded and we'll make that available to you afterwards. There's going to be some interactive polling during the workshop to gather feedback, and you're also welcome to use the chat for questions for the speakers. We'll collect them as we go, or if you have any issues. So today, during this session, we're going to start with an introduction to nature-based solutions. Then we're going to move into the panel discussion, and there will be a designated Q&A with the audience at the end. But again, we welcome you to enter any questions that you have in the chat along the way, and we're going to be collecting those throughout the session. And then we can get to them at the Q&A at the end if they're not addressed before that. And again, be ready to participate. We're going to need your interaction for this session to work. So on that note, please find the instructions in the chat here for Poll Everywhere. You can click on the link and use your web browser, or you can use the QR code here to pull it up on your phone, or via text. You can text LISRES to 22333, which is another way to join. And just note the first polling question we have here is a map. And this does not work on your phone. This one will only work on the web. So please share where you are joining us from today. This will it's not only interesting for us, but also gives our panelists an idea of who is in the audience today. Okay, we're seeing a nice distribution throughout the watershed and beyond. Good Long Island representation there, NYC showing up, and then lots of dots sprinkling up in the upper areas of Connecticut and New York. Oh yeah, and then some people adding in the chat too. Got Montauk, Newington, Norwalk, Westbrook, Mamaroneck, Albany, wonderful. Gonna have to zoom out on the map a little bit for that one. Great. Okay. Looks like we've saturated there. Okay, a couple more in the chat sharing Danbury, East Haven, Fort Washington, Comac. Wonderful. Now, if you could please also share the sector that you represent or that's closest to what you would say, so we can get an idea of our audience affiliations. You can see we have a good amount, mostly nonprofit NGOs, a good amount of government representation, both local and state and federal, consultants, academics, individuals, community groups showing up. And a few more responses filtering in. Washington. Great. Thank you. So for a little context, in case you weren't at the first session, we are the part of the Long Island Sound Partnership. This was previously known as Long Island Sound Study until June of this year. And we're a group of organizations, agencies, scientists, and community members working together to protect and restore Long Island Sound. We support clean waters and watersheds, healthy habitats, thriving wildlife, resilient coasts and communities, and an informed and engaged public. The work of the Long Island Sound Partnership, Connecticut Sea Grant and New York Sea Grant continue to have strong and longstanding bipartisan support. And with this support, we continue to focus on advancing the goals of the Long Island Sound Partnership's CCMP, which I'll explain more in a minute, and specifically the Sustainable and Resilient Communities goal. So Sustainable and Resilient Communities is one of 4 goals, and we are a team of 6 extension professionals supporting a work group that supports that goal. And each of us covers a region around the Sound. So we have Elizabeth Hornstein in Suffolk, Sarah Schaefer-Brown in Nassau, Ben Goldberg in New York City, Sarah Powell in Westchester. I'm Deb Abibu covering Western Connecticut, and we have Sarah Schechter in Eastern Connecticut. So along with our new name, the LIST partnership developed a new CCMP, or Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, in 2025. So the objectives highlighted under this goal target 3 critical areas that support our main goal of empowering Long Island Sound communities to plan for and respond to environmental challenges in ways that prioritize well-being for all. So to do that, we are focusing on increasing the capacity of decision makers to advance initiatives, supporting resilience planning that reflects community priorities, and encouraging the implementation of projects that help communities adapt to flooding and other climate impacts. Each objective is followed by actions and supporting activities to be taken over the next 5 years to help achieve it. So bringing us back to our discussion of nature-based solutions, these are an important component of our 3rd objective that deals with supporting project implementation. So now I'll turn it over to Ben Goldberg to share an introduction to nature-based solutions.
Thanks, Deb. Hi, everyone. If you didn't see us on the last panel, I'm Ben Goldberg. I'm the SRC for New York City, and it is my pleasure to introduce today our topic of discussion and our panel on nature-based solutions and lead us into the discussion today. So we thought, though, that before we dive in, first, sorry, we have another poll for you. So if you go back to the link that was shared at the beginning, it's also in the chat now. Pop in and let us know, what is your familiarity with nature-based solutions? Are you very familiar? Somewhat? Not at all? Expert? Let's see the answers come in. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of experts in the room. That is intimidating, but great. And we're very excited to have you. Thank you for coming. Hopefully, I think we also have a lot of experts on our panel. So it'll be hopefully a very, a rich discussion. Seeing a lot of folks somewhat familiar, very familiar. Okay, so good mix. All right. So good. So you're already familiar with the concept. That's great. I think that means we're going to have a really good discussion today. So moving on, we thought though, for at least to get us all up to speed and make sure we're all on the same page, we wanted to start just by really defining the terms. So starting with, what are nature-based solutions? One thing that can be challenging out there is that there are actually quite a few different definitions, in existence. And when you go back and consult literature, you can see them described in different ways. We pulled out these two from two, federal agencies as two that kind of help, I think, illustrate the breadth and range and different dimensions of nature-based solutions that are out there. This first one from FEMA, kind of describing nature-based solutions or NBS in terms of kind of planning and design and engineering practices that integrate natural elements into the built environment to make communities more resilient. That's certainly, I think, in line with how we'll be discussing NBS today. But another way to look at them is from this other definition from EPA, which emphasizes a little bit more of the kind of broader landscape and land and natural resource management practices, whether that's protecting, conserving, or restoring natural or modified resources or ecosystems to enhance environmental outcomes and provide multiple benefits to people and nature. So again, just showing a bit of the range, and we'll definitely dig into more of these aspects later on. Of course, then though, nature-based solutions brings up a lot of other different and related concepts. One other concept that you might hear discussed today and that comes up a lot is this related term around natural and nature-based features, or an NBF. And some might think of that as more or less interchangeable with nature-based solutions, or others might see them described a little more specifically as this Army Corps definition conveys, NNBF as the use of landscape features for flood risk management, more specifically in coastal settings, and then referring to nature-based features as those that mimic natural processes for specific services, such as flood risk reduction. Again, just some slight nuance, but just to make sure that we know that there are other terms out there, and like all these other shown in the diagram on this slide. And then, of course, third, we really wanted to bring in to the conversation and terminology the idea of green infrastructure. Again, this is something that some might use interchangeably with NBS, but typically when we refer to green infrastructure, most people in our field are going to be talking about what kind of is in line with this definition on the slide. And that comes actually directly from the Clean Water Act. And it is written into federal legislation. And that really refers to plant and soil systems, permeable surfaces, stormwater harvesting and landscape practices to store, infiltrate, and manage stormwater and reduce flows into sewer systems and surface waters. So again, that's really thinking more about using kind of landscaping and natural processes to manage stormwater. And you can see this also referred to as green stormwater infrastructure. So then, what are these, and what can NBS look like? Around the Long Island Sound, we may typically see NBS applications grouped into these two large broad categories. This is definitely not a true binary per se, and definitely not the full list, but in our specific geographic context where we're really contending with coastal and water hazards, we see NBS used firstly in a lot of coastal resilience settings, and some examples of those include wetland restoration, living shorelines, floodplain restorations and dunes, And then also in stormwater management context, like, the green infrastructure methods I just mentioned. And those might include rain gardens and bioswales, green roofs, rainwater capture, and urban forestry methods. Now, I've been talking about them already for a bit, but like, why do we care about nature-based solutions? Why do we really want to use them, and why are people so interested in them? And a lot of that comes down to this concept of ecosystem services and the benefits that communities derive from the natural environment and natural resources that we really depend upon for our survival and our well-being. And that might be, some examples of ecosystem services include clean air, clean water, food, economic activity and health, as shown here. And the great thing about NBS is that they bring a lot of those benefits to communities while also providing, hazard mitigation or dealing with other specific environmental challenges depending on their kind of design and purpose. So take these examples here, an oyster reef or living shoreline that provides a buffer between residential areas and the coast also provides habitat or water quality improvements, maybe even a source of food and economic activity. Or we can look at a rain garden or some kind of green street in an urban setting that maybe mainly is used to mitigate flooding or filter runoff, but also can help manage the urban heat island effect and provide valuable public green space. And then, another really exciting example, increasingly seen as an example of nature-based solutions, is urban agriculture, which can also have those kind of heat island and benefits while also providing food and habitat. So again, these are just examples, and many other kinds of benefits that I didn't even mention. But we can also think of these as the co-benefits that nature-based solutions provide, which is often a way that these are framed. But that's also, firstly, not to completely disparage the use and application of more traditional hard or gray infrastructure. They certainly have a place in our communities, whether that's a water treatment plant or some kind of flood barrier, as examples. But we can also think of, and it's worth noting, that nature-based solutions can be seen as existing on a sort of spectrum from green to gray infrastructure. And where we draw the line is definitely something that can be contended and will be something that I think we discuss a bit today. But another aspect of that as well is that nature-based solutions can also consist of, both elements, and they can integrate or what we might call hybrid infrastructure. So again, just more food for thought, and another aspect of these practices, and that there's not always a clear line between what is and isn't a nature-based solution. And then really just lastly, before we dive into today's panel, I just wanted to, we wanted to mention some of the excitement and evidence of success for nature-based solutions. And firstly, we can point to a lot of the economic savings, and value of utilizing nature-based solutions, as some of these figures here show, cost savings in storm protection or services that, are maintained or gained. And then lastly, we can also think about the really proven ability of nature-based solutions to be really successful in withstanding disturbances, potentially even better than hard infrastructure, as this quote shows. I won't read it all in the interest of time, but just showing that in some cases, nature-based solutions can actually withstand damages better than hard infrastructure, and nature also has this kind of other aspect of being able to recover potentially more quickly than hard infrastructure. So with all that, of course, that was a lot of, a glowing review of nature-based solutions and the promise of it. And, of course, it is very exciting, but we also really want to think about some of the challenges and issues that do arise. And that's really the goal of today's panel. So I'm really excited to turn the floor to our panelists and hear from our experts today. And the goals of today's panel really are to hear from practitioners who have experience with NBS in the field and around the Long Island Sound, to discuss best practices and share challenges and success stories of implementation, and to explore when it is and isn't appropriate to incorporate these elements. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn the floor to today's panelists and introduce you all to them today. So, today we have five very expert panelists from a range of backgrounds, whether that's local government, nonprofit, academia, and the private sector. They have a range of expertise and experience working with nature-based solutions, and I'm really excited to introduce you to them all today. So starting off, we have Suzanne Boyle from NV5. And Suzanne is an award-winning principal landscape architect at NV5 with more than 25 years of experience advancing sustainable and nature-based design solutions. Her work spans urban parks, waterfronts, and community landscapes, integrating ecological restoration and climate resilience into every project. And with a foundation in landscape construction, Suzanne emphasizes practical, implementable design that endures. Welcome, Suzanne. Next, I will introduce Alan Cohn, who is Senior Policy and Science Advisor to the Deputy Commissioner of Sustainability at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. Alan's focus has been on preparing water systems for climate change and population growth through partnerships and financial incentives to protect communities and optimize infrastructure. Alan represents New York City as the staff chair of the Water Utility Climate Alliance, a group of 12 large utilities which provide leadership and collaboration on climate change issues affecting the country's water agencies. Next, I will introduce Dr. Kathleen Fallon, who has been working as the Marine District Coastal Processes and Hazards Specialist with New York Sea Grant since 2017. In her role, she works with various stakeholders, including residents and municipal officials, to address issues they are experiencing from coastal flooding and erosion. While with New York Sea Grant, she has been working to advance the awareness of nature-based solutions and address challenges to implementing these features. Welcome, Kathleen. And next, I know we have a lot of really great panelists. Next, we have Amy Motney, also from New York City DEP. Amy Motney is the Director of Integrated Water Management at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, where she supports sustainability and resiliency initiatives. She holds a Master of Landscape Architecture from the University of Michigan and has more than 15 years of professional experience working in water resource management across public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Her portfolio at New York City DEP includes leading agency efforts around demand management and conservation, supporting planning and engagement on cloudbursts, and she is currently project manager for the Tibbetts Brook Daylighting Project in the Bronx. Welcome, Amy. And last but not least, we have John Trzynski from the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, or CIRCA. John is a community planner with experience helping coastal and inland communities develop strategies to respond to the growing impacts of sea level rise, coastal and riverine flooding, and climate change. In 2018, John became Director of Resilience Planning at the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, or CIRCA, at the University of Connecticut. In this role, he manages the Resilient Connecticut Planning and Technical Assistance Program, which provides support to communities in developing a resilience project pipeline for Connecticut. Prior to joining CIRCA, John worked with the Nature Conservancy in New Jersey as Coastal Resilience Manager, leading a statewide effort to incorporate living shorelines, marsh restoration, and ecosystem-based climate adaptation strategies into coastal community planning efforts. So please join me in welcoming our panelists, and I'll turn the floor back to Deb.
Thank you for the great overview and introductions, Ben. So to kick off our panel discussion, we're going to start with a poll. And I'm going to show you here a series of photos of solutions. And it'll be up to you audience members to share if you think each one qualifies as a nature-based solution. You know, there's a range of definitions, so there's not a right or wrong answer here. Or, you know, if you think it's not. So we are going to take a look first. The photos, not the largest, so I'm going to describe it a little bit. This one features permeable pavement in a parking lot area of the Bronx Zoo. This photo is from NV5. So, so share, you know, is this hot or not? Or do we have a nature-based solution here? You don't have a maybe option because it's more fun for us this way. Give you a second to enter your answers. And let's see what the survey says. Okay, getting, oh yeah, a little bit of an even split here between yes and no. That's interesting. You know, based on what we discussed before, you know, these can be, you know, often used in conjunction with other solutions. So it might depend if you're looking at it, you know, completely on its own, you know, or in a larger context. Okay, next, we have a photo that's an example of habitat protection. So this is a water course along with its intact vegetated shoreline, which you could also refer to as a riparian buffer. And in this scenario, you know, this forest has been protected from development. So do you consider this a nature-based solution? Give you another couple seconds so you can make your choice independent of the influence of other people's thoughts. All right, let's see what the survey says. Okay, a lot of clear yeses on this one. You know, and again, depending on the definition, some definitions are only considering it, you know, if it has been, you know, created by people in some way, and others are much more broad and considering elements of the landscape itself to be NBSs. All right, now we have a constructed wetland or stormwater park in Babylon, New York. What do folks think about this one? Nature-based solution, yes or no? All right, let's see the results. All right, many more yeses here. And this one is, you know, in conjunction with, you know, parking lot drainage. Hard to tell from the photo exactly, you know, how many other elements are involved too, though. This image features a living breakwater in Raritan Bay off the south shoreline of Staten Island, New York. So I'll note here the materials include lots of rocks, but there's also something called e-concrete, like eco and concrete put together as a word, and those units which are designed to attract marine life. So what do people think about this living breakwater? All right, let's see. All right, again, mostly on the yeses. You know, with living shorelines, again, we looked at that spectrum. Sometimes people might only consider it a living shoreline if it has, or nature-based solution if there's, plants also involved. But you can see sometimes if the design facilitates the attraction of other life, that many would consider it a nature-based solution. Okay, and then finally, I'll describe this one a little bit since it's a smaller diagram. This is Liberty Street in the Meadowlands. This is a design that includes a new pump station, that's the red brick building there, and a new force main pipeline that collects water and discharges it downstream. There is an on-site biofilter basin that filters parking lot runoff with some native plants. So what do folks think about this one? Nature-based solution or not? All right, let's see what folks think. Okay, a little bit more of a split here. Again, maybe it depends, how much plants and biofiltering are involved. But there's certainly a lot of gray, it's a pretty heavy gray infrastructure for at least a big part of the solution. All right, so I'd like to invite our panelists to share your videos. Panelists, are you there? There we go. And I'll start with our first question here, which is based on the discussion we were just having with the poll questions. Where do you draw the line with what's considered a nature-based solution or not? And what are some important considerations for when you would use green versus gray infrastructure? And I'm going to start this question off with Alan. I'll rotate here. Are you there, Alan?
Yes, I am. So I answered yes to all of the prompts. So I have a pretty broad definition of nature-based solutions. Uh, I consider, for example, the examples shown here is our South Jamaica Houses cloudburst project, which we actually just finished constructing this year. Um, but this is a landscape feature, in this case, a basketball court, which is designed to flood during extreme rain events. It also has subsurface storage, which infiltrates into the ground, but that it is connected to the streets that diverts the runoff, from the streets into this area, as well as two grassy areas that are designed to filled with water during rain events. So it functions as part of the system, where some of the features, with while they might be paved, not what we typically think of as nature. The infiltration piece of this helps restore some of the natural functions from the landscape, helps divert water that would have been going into the sewers into the ground. And it's part of a system, as I mentioned. So you can tie the green and the gray together to make it work. And I do feel that, in some cases it is appropriate to just have, green and optimize, what some would, consider true natural features. But oftentimes having green and gray tied together can actually help to, support the function. For example, if you want to build an area to store water, even if it's a pond, a grassy area, whatever it is, oftentimes you may need to construct the pipes to get there. The New York City Blue Belt is a great example of that. So green and gray together, in my opinion, can often help the system perform and can be considered together as a nature-based system.
Thanks, Alan. Amy, I wanted to invite you to add any comments as well.
Sure, I won't add too much more. I share a similar perspective to Alan, kind of have a broad definition of nature-based solutions. And I think, I guess the one thing I did want to note is like when we're looking at urban or hyper-urban areas versus more rural or natural landscapes, I think there's a little bit of a gray area in terms of like how we think about nature-based solutions. But I do think like when the goal is, stormwater management, I think scale is really critical. So some of the nature-based solutions might not be optimal when you're sort of space constrained. So I think this hybrid approach is a really effective technique to pursue specifically in our urban areas.
Yeah, that's a good point about space constraints often dictating what's possible. Um, Kathleen, would you like to add?
I want to mention, I just want to reiterate what Ben already spoke about, is that there really is a wide range of definitions of nature-based solutions. And I think working with the stakeholders, the practitioners, and the priorities of the project is really important to when identifying what your definition of a nature-based solution is. I will say in my practice, it's more of a coastal processes specialist. When we talk about nature-based solutions, I'm usually talking about something on the shoreline related to somewhat more of a living shorelines.
Mm-hmm. Right. John, any additional thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I would reiterate what's already been mentioned. It's definitely a spectrum that often, at least as it comes up for circus work, oftentimes we're working on flood mitigation projects or stormwater management projects. And some of the things that would push us towards one end of the spectrum or the other, things like risk tolerance, what is the sort of the consequence of the measure working or not working? What type of flood conditions are we trying to solve for? Is it a kind of a nuisance flooding condition, or is it something that's a lower recurrence interval, something like more extreme precipitation, those types of things? How much space do we have to work with? If we're able to sort of achieve the goal of the flood risk reduction and have all of those co-benefits that can come from nature-based solutions, and that's usually when we would really like push for that towards the green end of that spectrum.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that sometimes when the risks are really high, you might be forced into more of the grayer area to start at least?
Correct.
Gotcha. And Suzanne, if you'd round us out.
I kind of agree with what all the other panelists have said. I also think that a lot of times, based on our experience, is that there is rarely a project where it's just one singular solution that is the best ultimate product or leads to the best product. It's usually a hybrid solution that incorporates nature-based solutions, but also includes some hard infrastructure. So I would say, based on my experience, it's usually some sort of a hybrid solution is the best solution, which I kind of think summarizes what everybody else said.
Right. So For our second question, Suzanne, I'm going to start with you. And I'd like to ask, what is the most successful or innovative nature-based solution project that you've been involved with? And if you could tell us a little bit about why you think it was successful. And I know you have some slides here to share, so let me know if you'd like to.
Yes, if you can go to the next slide. So before I dive into answering your question directly, I just wanted to touch up upon a couple of other projects that show you the range of projects that we are working on at NV5. So, and they kind of like are in the range of, you know, debatable, like, are they nature-based solutions or are they going more into green infrastructure? So the picture on the bottom left is a 10,000 square foot green roof that was installed at the newly renovated aquatic center about 10 years ago at Roberto Clemente State Park. The green roof was selected for stormwater runoff reduction to reduce the energy cost for cooling and heating and extend the life of the roof membrane. So again, like, there's a lot of overlap. It's definitely storm water infrastructure related, but it is a nature-based solution that leads to these results. The picture in the center was one of our polling questions from a different perspective, and much more vegetated at this point. This is a 1.5 acre created wetland pond that was created as part of a water quality and stormwater infrastructure project to improve the Karls River watershed in Babylon. The 20 acres, actually, it's not just the adjacent parking lot, it's 20 acres of paved roadway from Sunrise Highway used to flow directly into the Karls River with all the pollutants and sediments. And as part of this project to reduce the stormwater flow and filter out pollutants, we designed this wetland pond, 1.5 acres in size. So again, even though this looks very nature-based, there is a hybrid portion to this. The stormwater flows, it gets diverted from a storm pipe into a water quality pre-treatment unit before flowing into a forebay and then into this vegetated wetland. And then last but not least, the project on the right shows a bioretention swale, which is part of very large green infrastructure network that we designed for Nassau Community College in Garden City. As part of a very large parking lot expansion project. So the instructions given by Nassau County was to manage the 100-year storm event on site without discharging any stormwater into the municipal system or the adjacent Meadowbrook. This was achieved by designing 3,600 linear feet of bioretention swales that are incorporated into the parking lot. And then an underdrain takes the clean filtered water into very shallow infiltration basins that are centrally located within the parking lots. So again, this shows that, like, there are all these nature-based solutions in combination with some, more gray infrastructure elements that can create a more resilient project. So next slide is now leading to my favorite project, which I think is more like a very clear-cut nature-based solution. So NV5 Landscape Architecture was part of an engineering team with LKMA for this stream resilience project in South Valley Stream. The goal of the project was to enhance the flood resiliency along the shorelines of Millbrook. The land that we had to work with was a very narrow park called Path to the Park, and 3 pocket parks that were incorporated into this park. The tools that we used to make this a successful project was the creation of a tidal marsh, as you can see in those pictures here, by compromising some of the pocket parks, but reducing the usage of that park by giving land back to the stream. to store to water storage and increase capacity during high tide and flood events. And then a boardwalk was designed to experience this marsh during the whole during high tide events. Next slide, please. The key element for making this project more resilient was to raise the shoreline by 3 feet from elevation 4 to elevation 7. This took a lot of fill to raise the shoreline and was also, again, a hybrid here as well, because in some areas the path, the park was so narrow that there was no room to build up the living shoreline, the planted living shoreline. So we did use some revetment and concrete wall, as you can see in the picture on the right. But for the majority of the park and the stream is protected by a living shoreline, as you can see in the picture on the left. We use coraloids for stabilization and some boulders as well along the path itself. Another pocket park was designed as a bathtub, essentially. This is the first picture on the left. There's this meadow area that's on the right side of the path. It's inaccessible. It was designed as a pollinator garden. There's an interpretive sign explaining the function of this area. So during high tide events, it can flood and again provides more water storage. And then last but not least, we also protected the upland portion of the park by implementation of bioretention swales. You can kind of see it, the grassy areas on the right side of the path. The bioretention swales capture and infiltrate runoff from the adjacent properties to protect the stream as well. So next slide, please. So the reason why this is my favorite project is because this design team was fully committed and dedicated to working with mostly nature-based solutions. We did take a diverse approach, so we didn't rely on a single strategy. We used living shoreline, the tidal marsh, stream widening, created floodable areas, coir logs, bioretention swales. But we did also include some hardened infrastructure elements. So it was ultimately a hybrid solution as well. And also the client was engaged and committed to support these types of solutions and was also aware what that entailed in regards of future maintenance requirements for these solutions.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yeah, this project is so wide-ranging. It's amazing how many different sorts of strategies were incorporated into one project. I'd love to go visit that sometime.
By the Green Acre Mall.
Say again?
By the Green Acre Mall in Valley Stream.
Okay, everything's by the mall. Let's hear now from Amy about a successful project example.
Thanks, Suzanne. That was really inspiring to see such a large scale example of built work. I'm going to talk about a project that's actually in design, very close to, well, it's completed design. We're getting ready for construction, but the Tibbetts Brook Daylighting Project that I've been working on for a few years with DEP. This is a partnership project with New York City Parks, and it's a daylighting project, which means we are effectively daylighting a historic stream that used to run through the historic Kingsbridge neighborhood in the Bronx. So this stream was covered and directed into a sewer in 1912. For decades, the community has been advocating for daylighting. So this was through a number of environmental organizations, including BCEQ, Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, many others that really started to spur some interest in this concept. The Parks Department became involved as they were converting stretches of the former rail line to greenway assets in Van Cortlandt Park, and started to look at this sort of remaining abandoned rail corridor formerly owned by CSX as part of their greenway solution. And New York City DEP got involved because around the same time we were also looking at strategies for our citywide long-term control plan to improve water quality this was for the Harlem River. And we did a feasibility study to see if daylighting would be an effective solution, and it showed that it was. So in our current design and modeling, we're anticipating fully daylit corridor will reduce combined sewer overflow impacts to the Harlem River by about 220 million gallons per year. And I think, the question asks like why. I think this is a very successful project. Obviously, we don't have a built example to refer to yet, but this is a project that really just had a great alignment of a lot of stakeholder interests. So there was, buy-in and partnership with the Parks Department, very much desired and advocated for by the community. It's also supporting the advancement of the Greenway network across New York City and beyond, and will be, when it's built, the largest green infrastructure project in New York City, and I think a really great precedent for future projects that could be advanced. And yeah, that's what I'll say about it. There's lots more on the DEP website if folks are interested.
Yeah, that's fantastic how this aligned so well with what the community desired and what was able to be designed here. Thank you for sharing. Alan, I'll pose the question to you next.
Great, and I'm going to actually refer back to that basketball court, which is now on a timeline of overall project. So while I'm, very proud of having contributed to that particular project, I want to talk about the success overall of the New York City Green Infrastructure Program, and how really each project has built off of the next. So the Green Infrastructure Program actually was something that I worked on, was one of the first things I worked on when I started working for New York City with the Green Infrastructure Plan in 2010. Through that plan, it was the first time we were really using nature-based solutions at scale. I talked about the Blue Belt program that started in the 90s, but this was retrofitting, city streets, parks, New York City Housing Authority with green infrastructure throughout the city. So really working in the dense urban environment for the first time. And those partnerships have really been, so powerful. Amy talks about parks. We have, without our partners, we are the water utility. We're used to working underground, but without our agency partners, without the land owners, we wouldn't be able to implement any of these projects. Beyond city partners, we actually formed an international partnership with Copenhagen in 2015. They were really pushing forward this idea of using the landscape to be able to flood at the surface. That is why we chose the design we chose for the basketball court. So in addition to infiltration-based features like rain gardens, you can infiltrate, but you can also, those will eventually fill to capacity, right? The ground can only hold so much water, but so can you design it so once the subsurface is saturated, the surface can flood as well. So again, in a dense urban environment, that we might not be talking about a pond or a grassy swale, or we might have to, seek those opportunities, but also think about what other areas can be considered safe to flood. How much can you do below, but then what can you do above the surface? Um, again, it's really been a continuum. Each success is kind of like built upon the last. We learn lessons, we socialize ideas, we learn from our agency partners. How do we combine our objectives so that we can work together with the space that we have to maximize it for both natural functions as well as for other purposes. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, it looks like you guys have really been on the leading edge of a lot of this green infrastructure. The design of the bioswales on the left, I know, inspired similar work in New Haven, Connecticut. So I'm hoping to see how a lot of this work grows and continues to inspire things throughout the region as it advances. Alan, so I'm gonna stay with you for a minute now, and we're gonna consider the flip side here. Um, are there projects that you've worked on that haven't been successful? And if so, why do you think they didn't succeed?
When we were prepping for this panel, I was like, no, I don't consider any, projects completely unsuccessful. I think every experience is a learning experience. So we test things out, we implement them, we monitor them, and hopefully we learn from our mistakes. And again, even a mistake to me is a learning experience. How can we do it better for the next project? That being said, yes, of course, there are things that we could improve upon. And you know, one of the I'm really just going to segue, I guess, to Amy. Like, I think this is not an example of something that is not successful, but where we are looking to promote like a certain type of change. In this case, promoting like the use of vegetation versus a tank or storage. We might not get the outcomes that we had hoped for. And maybe I've already taken all your talking points here, Amy, but I'll turn it over to you now.
Yeah, please go ahead, Amy.
Not at all. Yeah, I was gonna say like this, I wouldn't call the unified stormwater rule unsuccessful. It was a massive effort by the agency that I think is a huge success, basically uniting our MS4 and combined sewer system permitting requirements through our regulator, New York State, into one program. So it's, more streamlined in terms of how we're monitoring these permits. But as part of this rule change that was promulgated in 2022, we also imposed more stringent stormwater requirements on both public and private development sites. So now every single development site has to go through this permitting process before they can get their site sewer connection permit. And this program, it strongly relies on the guidance in the New York City Stormwater Manual pictured here, and it embraces a retention first hierarchy that prioritizes green vegetated stormwater management practices. So that is the goal. And any site that is not, selecting a vegetated retention practice has to provide strong reasoning for why that is not the case. So sometimes it's soil contamination, sometimes it's size constraints. There's a range of reasons why it's really, really hard, especially in a hyper dense urban environment, to implement nature-based solutions at the scale that will allow private sites to meet their stormwater management requirements. So what we're seeing in a lot of these private applications is sort of non-vegetated detention that's being implemented. So I think, as Alan alluded to, like, we're trying to promote different strategies that could sort of look at how we maximize the vegetated opportunities, and perhaps that requires broader consideration of the watersheds, I think, that we're in New York City, and how do we sort of think about sort of these different sites working together collectively across a watershed to manage water rather than kind of site by site implementation.
Yeah, I agree that it would be a mischaracterization to call this unsuccessful. I love the framework that you show here on the right. I haven't seen something quite like that. And as you were both alluding to, learning from what needs to be adjusted is how we get to the biggest successes. So thank you for sharing. Suzanne, I'd like to hear your perspective next.
Well, I'm taking this from a totally different angle. And again, no project is really unsuccessful, and you always learn from mistakes. But what I want to talk about here is that this is a very small project, or the subject that I'm talking about is a very small element. It's a small rain garden that we installed as part of a larger project in a village on Long Island. And there was a local interest group that wanted to include sustainable green element, and the suggestion was a rain garden for the stormwater treatment within this project. So it was supported by our client at the time, and was also presented to the public. And we were thrilled to install a rain garden in a downtown on Long Island, because we also do a lot of the rain garden implementations and inspections in New York City. So we were thrilled to now we are moving to Long Island. And then once it was installed, it actually met a lot of resistance. There was the problem of who is maintaining this green infrastructure element now, because DPW doesn't have a maintenance weeding staff. And then parking district was complaining about the loss of a parking stall. And then also new administration came in office, and they opposed this element. So eventually it was actually removed and turned into a parking stall. But really what I want to take out of this is that the key takeaways is that any new type of project needs broad support across departments and across political alignments, and that support needs to be received before the project goes into implementation, obviously. So the broad consensus building is so critical for any of these new types of projects, or relatively new nature-based solution projects. And also educating the public about the positive impacts. I'm wondering if there would have been an interpretive sign explaining this feature, if that would have actually changed some public opinion. So yeah, key takeaways are building broad consensus between departments and interest groups beforehand, and also education of the public, and reinforcing the maintenance requirements beforehand.
Yeah, this you bring up some points that I want to take a little closer look at next, which are things that can pose barriers to these projects. Now, sometimes the barrier is to get started, and sometimes it can happen at other phases of the project, like in your example here. So, audience, I'd like you to turn back to the Poll Everywhere poll, and this is a word cloud. So share your thoughts on some of the main barriers to nature-based solutions. And I'll add, if you were entering something that's more than one word long, join it by an underscore so that the phrase will stay together. Funding coming up right away. Support, yeah, just as we discussed, that support could be from the local government or the community itself. Maintenance, we see how that can pose an issue, requires buy-in from, people over time and different groups of people. Also seeing items about understanding and unfamiliarity. People can often be, resistant to change or things that they don't understand, maybe rightfully so. Education can be an important component. I think I saw trash in there that sometimes these projects can end up collecting them. And, and then there's issues in terms of like what's privately owned, what's publicly owned. In terms of, what kind of opportunity you have to work with. Resources in general, yeah, beyond funding, space, accessibility. Yeah, some of the, great examples we saw today incorporated that, but, that it's not always the case, and that might be, something needed to make a project advance. So now back to the panel. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Let's consider, so these barriers that the audience just mentioned, does that track with what you've experienced when working on nature-based solution projects? And share a little bit about how you think we could overcome them. I'd like to start here with Kathleen.
So I want to talk a little bit about a project I've been working on in partnership with the Science and Resilience Institute at Jamaica Bay, funded through the U.S. Coastal Research Program. And for the last 3 years, we've been working together on this project where we've been trying to share knowledge around NNBFs across New York State. So not just here on Long Island, but also in the Hudson and up through the Great Lakes. But one of the outcomes of this project has been us working on identifying some challenges to implementing NNBF in New York State. And I wanted to share them with the listeners here today. We have really noticed that over the past decade or so, in New York State, interest in implementation of NNBF has really grown. But we see widespread adoption being limited due to a lack of knowledge specifically about the performance of NNBF. So the idea of, do we know it's going to work? Hesitation to be the first to try something new. And then, of course, because we have this lack of implementation, there's not a lot of knowledge and information about best practices. So really trying to promote the idea of sharing all of this information with our stakeholders. We've noticed that a few of the challenges that we see are related to project typology. Different projects can vary widely. So we already said this multiple times, but living and nature-based solutions can look different or defined differently. And because they are all different, it makes it kind of hard to compare across sites when we're not looking at one thing over and over and over again. We're looking at a wide range of different types of projects and trying to compare their success. Project monitoring has been difficult. That's a challenge. It's not always required. It's not always completed. And when it is completed, there's a wide range of different approaches and different metrics. Again, different projects have different priorities, so there's different monitoring. that is occurring, and different data that's collected and being observed. And then furthering into that, the data accessibility being a challenge. When the data is collected, accessibility can be limited. There's, one thing that we would love to see is a, statewide, easily accessible database that would promote and really enable for knowledge sharing across states and different practitioners. So after we identified these challenges, some of the solutions that we have proposed to explore in order to address the challenges are to really, New York Seagrin is going to be in 2026 exploring the development of a more formalized statewide community of practice of people working in and within NMBF projects. Really, again, encouraging the sharing of successes and lessons learned, similar to even what we're doing here today. Again, encouraging standardized data collection through consistent monitoring and building a robust data set. Exploring ways for data visualization. I'm a strong proponent of being able to visualize data that will be able to inform the decisions and also increase education and awareness about the performance and best practices of NMBF. And then again, just mentioning the idea of a comprehensive NMBF or nature-based solutions database where practitioners can input their data from their projects over time, and people can go there to learn about the successes and lessons learned. And again, just really trying to share this information so that we can all, learn from each other.
Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, I think that we were talking in some other sessions about how much communities really do learn from each other's successes. So it's exciting to see these proposed solutions and how they might grow and be able to inspire more adoption. But like you mentioned, we really have to understand what the barriers are to know how to overcome them. John, I'd like to hear your perspective next on these barriers and how you think we might work towards solutions.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think everything that Kathleen said is really tracks with I think my experience with Circa and working with towns. I mean, I kind of see there's sort of two types of issues that come to my mind, and the first is about and I mentioned primarily we've been working a lot on sort of like flood risk reduction projects. And oftentimes there's sort of a mismatch between the green infrastructure or the NBS components, which maybe have like a primary goal of water quality, but when we're trying to sort of deal with water quantity issues, especially for some like more extreme rainfall events and things like that, there's sort of a mismatch in terms of the amount of space available at sort of the site and the parcel scale and sort of the goal of reducing the quantity of stormwater. So I think, in a lot of cases, I think having more clear sort of performance metrics, design guidelines, all of the things that were mentioned, better data that is more shared and coordinated across the community of practice, whether it's the professional services firms that work with municipalities and are, they have confidence that they can design them and they can estimate the costs and the maintenance costs and all of that. So that's kind of the first type of issue that I think would be helped with, better design guidelines with the specific goal of quantity reduction of, stormwater. The second type of issue that I see is where I kind of see more of the transformational potential of it. And that's where there's the opportunities to remove structures, remove infrastructure from the floodplain, do floodplain restoration, floodplain reconnection, all of those type of things, which have a different set of issues. In a lot of cases, it's more about sort of a longer term negotiation, funding buyouts, funding acquisitions, things like that.
Mhm.
And I think that some of the issues there is about where things will go. If it's a commercial corridor along the Antic River, for instance, how can we help to facilitate a process of shifting development somewhere else? And, in that case, I think these type of approaches have to be, I think, more integrated into some of the questions around housing, around economic development, transportation, all of those things are come into more directly into the conversation. In where I think, at least in Connecticut, we've had a few projects. A project that's often mentioned is the Meriden Green, which was an acquisition and kind of restoration of the floodplain. That was what made that project successful. In addition to the time it took over 10 years for that project to happen. But it was tied to housing. It was tied to economic development in downtown Meriden. So I think from my perspective, we have to, people in my world, we have to focus more on where is housing going to go? Where are we going to increase the density of housing? And where can we find opportunities for trade-offs between restoration and increasing housing opportunities and things like that. So I'll stop there, even though yeah, let's take a breath there.
Okay. Yeah, those are excellent points. And I think hopefully new regulations in Connecticut that help integrate climate resilience planning with POCDs can kind of get to what you're saying in terms of considering these things as a whole. It's certainly not as easy as in a hypothetical scenario we're looking at in the previous session. We're just, oh, this lighthouse is now moved. It could be a little oversimplified to think about it, but complicated to achieve that in practice. I know you're taking a breath, but I did want to ask you if you could touch on how permitting and regulations play into the challenges, at least from your Connecticut point of view.
Yeah. I know we have some disagreements. I mean, sort of Connecticut is, it's plagued by a lack of coordination amongst, amongst communities, and then even amongst the agencies in some cases. So, there's not always agreement on things like the role of shellfish in living shoreline projects and that sort of thing. I mean, I guess I would, to follow up on the last point, I would say that Connecticut has done a good job of developing some vehicles and tools that I think could be really useful going forward. In recent years, that the legislature has enabled the creation of stormwater authorities. There's new things that were enabled around transfer of development rights in the past legislative session. So allowing for like the TDR banks and things that might help to sort of facilitate some of those, shifting of development over time. there's also this new thing that was passed called the Resilience Improvement District that so there's a lot of things that the state has kind of set up as tools that will help to facilitate projects. And I think part of what I think we need to do is just amongst the community of practice that is like working with municipalities is to just start to help the municipalities to implement some of these new tools and just kind of figure it out and learn from the process of doing that.
Right.
So
let me see if Suzanne, could you also comment on the barriers that you see? And I can click to yes.
I'm not going to go over the entire slide because I feel Kathleen touched up a lot on my points here. So I will just pull out. So I agree with everything you said, Kathleen. I just wanted to pull out a few of the key elements that I see as the main barriers. Again, it follows up with that rain garden example. I see that the political bullet point 2, the political cycles, the short political cycles are conflicting with the long-term benefits and performance horizons of NBS solutions. Just the short time of the short thinking, and really we're talking about very long-lasting infrastructure that we are implementing, and that is I see that as a big hurdle. And the maintenance as well, like who is maintaining and how is it being maintained, and also there is the lack of or the budget misconception that NBS benefits are not often monetized, so that there's no clear cost benefit comparison available compared to hardened infrastructure. And lastly, there's more work to do in regards of the public perception that some of the features look unkempt, they look messy, and so like there is more work to do, and that's maybe leading right into the what I see as potential solutions. The public outreach. And it can be as simple as, like interpretive signage or like a workshop like today. I also see a potential for, and this is, needs to be implemented on a municipal level, state level, city level. I'm very hopeful for New York City, but like possibilities like tax incentives or abatements for property owners, private property owners too, because there's a clear tax benefit in the long run of because these nature-based solutions prevent or reduce flooding and thereby all the flood damage restoration that is required. And then last but not least, grant programs such as the Fantastic Sea Grant program that supports the planning, the implementation of nature-based solutions. And then maybe grants could be available also for the monitoring the success of these solutions to get more data available for local municipalities and also create better guidelines.
Yeah, you touched on the tax incentives, and also I wanted to underline that what John mentioned before is that we are seeing some real creative financing models come out, like a tax increment-based finance modeling, the resilience improvement districts that Connecticut just adopted. And I imagine that could take different forms, but when you know that a property will increase in value over time, that allows for taking advantage of these finance models for resilience that have maybe had different applications in the past. So it's it's great to see such a wide range of of potential, future solutions we can look forward to, and everybody's been, trying out what works, learning from it. But there's a lot more that we could still be trying. Amy or Alan, would you like to add to the barriers discussion?
I think so much has already been covered. I just kind of want to agree with a couple points that have been made. There's so much there's so much power in the community of practice. That was something we were, I was discussing before with that timeline. It takes time, but building that community, and shared sense of ownership is so critical. Funding, is always a challenge, but a lot of great points. I heard grants, incentives. I made a note to myself. Anything that can be done to create the enabling or conditions for getting people to consider nature-based solutions, whether that's the unified stormwater rule, prompting them to consider nature-based solutions first. Doesn't always work, but it's a start. When you add in additional incentives like financial incentives, there's potentially, I was hearing, tie-ins with housing, so you can consider zoning incentives, and there's all sorts of tools that I think that can become cumulative, and hopefully, when if the first attempt, out the door doesn't do the trick, you can add to it. So I don't know, Amy, if you have more to add.
I can't think of anything else I would add. So much has been already covered today, but yeah, just sort of echoing all of the comments and noting the importance of community buy-in during, the design planning of nature-based solutions to really like foster kind of that shared ownership and really cultivate communities of stewards, I think, that take care of the infrastructure as it's being implemented in our communities.
Right, because these projects are carried out, ultimately at the level of the community. So that's important to underscore. So, John, I'll start with you for our next question. And I'd like us to think about, how we can work to identify more opportunities for nature-based solutions across the Long Island Sound area. Not limited to these areas, but as it came up in some discussion, that some of the challenges are in areas that are constrained, like urban areas, or where there's property, or there's a lot of private property. So you touched on solutions earlier already, but did you have any more thoughts on ways to identify expanding?
Yeah. Well, I think we've done a lot of planning in Connecticut, and there's quite a bit of sort of inventorying of challenges and opportunities. And, the Nature Conservancy has done pretty widespread inventory of potential projects. Save the Sound has an inventory. Circa has done a lot of inventorying of projects. And so I think what I'd like to see going forward is kind of a better coordination, more partnerships amongst groups such as those and in this group, to kind of work together. I think the projects that have been successful have really required a pretty diverse range of partners over a long period of time. So I think that's a good model to look for. And I think as I mentioned, I think we need to look for other communities that are ready to sort of have that discussion. Since I think scale is an issue in Connecticut, and I think if we could find some communities that are ready to have that conversation about like trade-offs and we're thinking about pulling back from development and supporting infrastructure in some areas, and then we're moving our focus of development to other areas. Having a real partnership between the state and the local community and different organizations um, would be a great way to develop more wins. I think we need more wins where we can kind of demonstrate the values, the multiple values that can be created um, through these sort of larger scale floodplain restoration projects. So that's what I'm hoping for going forward.
Yeah, I think we were talking earlier session with Sustainable CT about those opportunities, and it seems that there's sometimes towns, don't even realize how much they've already done, and so sometimes just kind of seeing how these things streamline into their goals they already have, could hopefully open the door if that guidance is there, if these partnerships and coordination is there to support it.
Yeah, a lot of times like the towns are sort of focused on, like I said, there's multiple things that are sort of competing priorities, whether it's economic development or housing, things like that. And I think better sort of incorporating nature-based solutions into that conversation, whether it's through the POCD, the Plan of Conservation and Development, or just having more of those voices at the table, I think would be a good model in Connecticut.
Definitely. Kathleen, let me turn it over to you for your thoughts.
Thanks. You mentioned private property, and I just wanted to touch on a quick case study. I know it's been highlighted at other SRC events, and it's in the Resilience Hub, but I just wanted to bring it up again today to really, because the North Shore of Long Island and the Long Island Sound is highly privatized. A lot of private property, private communities. And I just wanted to highlight a successful nature-based solution project that has been completed there. So a few years back now, we were contacted by this private community who, like many others, have been experiencing erosion and recession of their coastal bluff. After Sandy, they had explored the idea of what sort of coastal protection strategies they could use. And of course, the original proposal, which we see a lot on the North Shore, was to put in a rock revetment or a bulkhead to protect the toe of the bluff. For various reasons that I won't get into, the community decided to look into other options. And currently they have foregone the rock revetment for now and have been focusing on restoring their bluff through the use of sand fencing and beach grass plantings. And it's been very successful. We've gone out to see the site and seen how it has changed and grown, and the grass is spreading, and where they didn't plant, now there's beach grass, and it's moving up along the shoreline, up the bluff, and it's doing great. But I did want to so focusing on those opportunities, I think what made this such a great site for this project was that we had an environmentally minded community that were very interested in exploring restoration techniques. They were thinking ahead. That wasn't oh my gosh, we need to do something immediately to protect infrastructure. It was, we are thinking long term about the resilience of our community and how to protect over time. And we have a great group of very willing and supportive partners. I'll also mention there's a local school that has been that the community has gotten involved with, and they have been working with students to allow the students to come out onto their property and using it as a sort of living classroom experience. And the students are able to get out and learn about bluffs and erosion and keeping the beaches clean and healthy. So I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Kathleen. So it is time that we can turn it to open questions from the audience. So I'll give folks a minute to add questions into the chat. You can direct your question to a specific panelist, or you could just direct it to the panel as a whole. And let's see. Oops, I thought I have Sarah Powell, I have a Q&A slide there that is not showing up for some reason.
Let me see what I can figure out.
Okay. So let me take a look at what we have so far. And here we go. Well, I have some other questions we can share if needed. But first we have, let's see, a question from Sierra with Earth Law Center. And they said that they're currently leading a campaign to implement the New York Green Amendment, which grants New Yorkers the constitutional right to clean water, clean air, and a healthful environment. So she was interested in the conversation around nature-based solutions as being aligned with that, and even supported by the Green Amendment framework. So she'd like to ask the panelists, has the Green Amendment come up in your conversations or work? And if not, do you think integrating it could strengthen or improve outcomes for nature-based solutions?
I can jump in. It hasn't come up explicitly, but I'm interested to learn more, and it sounds, like it could promote what we are trying to do. One of the, it did make me think though of one of the challenges that we deal with as specifically in our case is as a water utility, is how do we do it all? How do we invest in cleaner water? How do we invest in flood resiliency? And how do we pay for it all while keeping our water rate customers' bills affordable? So, I think that the measures that we are putting forth to promote the work we're doing are certainly helpful, and I'd love to kind of make sure that everything that we're doing is considering sort of like the balancing act that we as practitioners are having to do to again to try to make sure that we can achieve multiple goals on behalf of the people living in our cities. So I'd welcome a conversation about that and how we can achieve the objectives of multiple stakeholders.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, it looks like a great place for a follow-up conversation. Did anybody else want to comment before I move on to the next question? Okay. Next I have a question for Kathleen or others who'd like to add. Could you talk about some of the best ways to approach private actors like homeowners about initiating nature-based solutions in their communities and with their buy-in?
Sure. So I think the first answer is education and awareness. I find when I speak with homeowners, a lot of them might not know that nature-based solutions or living shorelines exist or could be an option for their property. So I think just starting there and even presenting multiple options to a homeowner who is concerned about erosion or flooding or whatever whatever their concern might be. So I think, that's the first place to start in order to, get buy-in. And presenting it in a scientific way, if like these are the facts and these are the pros and the cons. Yeah, and I'm happy to talk more about that with anybody, because New York Sea Grant has and Connecticut Sea Grant has a lot of resources available to homeowners to provide that education and outreach. Well, shameless plug there, Deb.
No, that's great. So many resources. Did anybody else want to add before we go to the next question?
I feel like I can't miss this opportunity to talk about stormwater charges as an incentive to homeowners for reducing impervious area, preserving tree canopy. There's all sorts of things that a stormwater charge could incentivize. So I'm not sure if it helps in the beginning when you're talking about a stormwater charge, because some people might perceive it, even if it's not the case, as something new that they have to pay for. But once it's implemented, it could help serve that purpose.
I should just clarify that people may be familiar with the term stormwater authority in different areas where there's some piloting or work going on, but that's what and I'm not sure if that operates in what way that operates in the city, but I'm assuming you're referring to like a fee that's levied based on impervious surfaces on a property.
Correct. Yeah. So in some places where that is in effect, it does help to create this connection in people's minds about the need to manage our impervious area and preserve nature-based features to manage stormwater runoff.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it'll be, we have a couple of areas, in Connecticut experimenting with this now, and it'd be good to look to other examples of, how people get buy-in and how it's helped communities, incentivize the like green infrastructure, for example. All right. For our next question, are there any concerns about gentrification due to using nature-based solutions or NNBF in urban areas. So especially when you're talking about something like daylighting, have gentrification concerns come up?
It's a good question, and I get that a lot for the Tibbets project. But yeah, I think that specific example, it's, next to a major highway, so it's not really next to any areas that are like slated for major redevelopment, like directly adjacent to the project itself. So, the hope for this project is that it's really going to actually increase access to green space. So it's really providing this connectivity from areas that have been disconnected from access to some of the parks and open spaces in the Bronx. So I think, not too much of a concern in that regard. But yeah, certainly something I know others probably have comments on as well.
Thank you. Yeah, would anybody else like to add to that? Well, I think we know that, these projects involve change and, some parts of that are, um, might not be, in our control, could be predictable or not, like when we're talking about things that we know will increase a property value. So I think
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead,
I would
John.
say it's definitely a concern that we haven't sort of figured out a coherent way to address. I think a lot of times there's property owners versus renters. Sometimes there's a lot of interest from property owners and sort of like greening the neighborhood and increasing property values and sort of the long-term impacts to rents. And I think I know I've said this like already 4 times, but that's sort of like why it's important to sort of think about this in the context of like housing and these other issues. But yeah, it's definitely a concern that I don't think we've come up. I'm not familiar with a good approach that has worked to address it.
Yeah, if anybody figures out how to solve gentrification, follow up with us over email.
Put it in the chat.
No, in work I did in New Orleans, it was a constant issue because you had, areas being redeveloped that had been destroyed and you want to find solutions that are appropriate to, the neighborhood. While, in maintaining that character while also providing benefits. So that's no easy uh, no easy answer. Another question that we have is regarding long-term and short-term approaches. So can you, to the panel as a whole, comment on the longevity of nature-based solutions in contrast to the vulnerability of exclusively hard infrastructure? So how can we think about those things in the long term versus the short term?
I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer this, but the concept of regenerative, nature-based solutions comes to mind, and I was thinking back to the living breakwaters, or the breakwaters. Living breakwaters is the specific project off Staten Island that is intended for it to be the basis for uh, sea life to live on it. And I my understanding, again, probably not the best person, is that those types of solutions are relatively low maintenance, but others should chime in. And the only other thing I'll say is that there is a tie-in here with I think some of the community buy-in and even when we were towards the end of that gentrification discussion, I was thinking about the work we were doing with New York City Housing Authority to kind of co-develop what the solution is. Hopefully, the hope is that is, developing a shared sense of ownership in the communities that we're working in. Therefore, stewardship, maintenance, not driving people away. I'm not I again don't think there's a panacea, especially harkening back to that last conversation. But all to come back to the fact that the more that we are thoughtful about what we're implementing and how it can be sustained, I think that's going to enhance the longevity of what we're doing. In other cases, projects that we're doing, I think like rain gardens, we know that it might, be 10, 20 years before, it gets replaced. I don't know if, every project has to be, forever. We might have to come back and replace it. And that's just, sort of the natural, not different types of nature, but the natural life cycle that we expect for that project.
Yeah, you brought up a great point with the living shorelines that some of these projects can, not all of them, but some of them can be designed to be self-maintaining to some degree. If you're able to recruit oysters, for example, and they keep growing, that's a vision that's not possible for every project, of course. So I think to your other point, we can also, recognize that these projects can be really useful for buying time, that they don't always have to be the, the end all solution that's there for perpetuity. They can, help us, keep things, keep our risk lowered, while we work on other solutions, and hopefully gain multiple benefits in the meantime.
Yeah, and just to build upon that point, that is something we're actively looking at in areas that are chronically flooded throughout the city. And we have identified or are considering long-term sewer solutions. We're focusing on those areas as places where we might have also some options for some temporary nature-based solutions, which can continue to be there, after the sewers are built out, but they provide some temporary relief in the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you beat me to it, Alan. I was just going to say, that's sort of the approach that we're taking at DEP is kind of like a phase strategy to, flood resiliency. And I think, some of the nature-based solutions, particularly like green infrastructure, the smaller scale, distributed solutions, we can build those quickly. We have more than 10 years of experience designing and building these systems in New York City. So there's something that can be implemented as a, midterm solution to some of the challenges while the longer term solutions are underway. And, also kind of going back to the gentrification question on both like Tibbetts and our Cloudburst programs, we've really done a lot to embed community engagement through the design planning processes of those projects. So I think that is, one part of that solution is really like this co-visioning that we're hoping to initiate on these types of projects moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Suzanne, did you have something? I think I saw you come off mute before.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the maintenance requirements for that Valley Stream resilient project. So initially there was definitely more maintenance until all the planting was established. However, then much of the park is not like before that. The park was just mowed on a weekly basis. Everything was mowed other than the Phragmites that was along the former shoreline of the stream. And now, like we established a maintenance plan for like that. Some of or a lot of the areas are only mowed twice a year because we want the vegetation to grow high, and then the entire living shoreline obviously is left alone. So there's like I just want to stress the importance of that. We need very clear maintenance guidelines for these nature-based solutions because the regular maintenance staff that is just used to weekly mowing and leaf blowing, they are not familiar with these different types of techniques. But then once they become established, and it will be, at times or a lot of times less maintenance, but it will take a few years to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, these things don't live. They do need to be re-bedded, as Alan was saying. Every rain garden needs to be, soil exchanged and replanted eventually again. But so does any hard infrastructure. Sediments need to be cleaned out, and it's limited in space. So,
right.
And sides of looking at these things.
Yeah, and I think earlier we were talking about, the need for design guidelines. So that's a great, point you make, the extension of that, we also, along with that, we also need maintenance guidelines. Okay, so I am going to wrap us up. I want to thank everyone so much, the panelists for joining today and sharing your experiences and your thoughts. It's really been valuable, and thank everybody who is attending today for your interest and and sharing your perspectives through the polling and questions as well. I want to note that we have a feedback form. You can scan it with the QR code here or use the link that's in the chat. We really value the feedback. We read everything that we get and use it to shape our workshops in the future. When you close out of the Zoom, it'll also pop up automatically. So if you're able, please find the time to do that. And we want to make a plug for session 3. So the next round of our Long Island Sound Resilience Planning Support Program opened on Monday, December 1st. So if you tune into this session, you will get all the program details. And we'll also have in this session communities who have received support through the first round of the program share about their experience and what their next steps are. So again, thank you everybody so much. And we look forward to seeing you in the next session.